Hi everyone, welcome back to Garden Haven. My name is Michelle and today I'm back in the greenhouse to start some more seeds. It's a beautiful sunny day today. It is very warm in the greenhouse. As you can see probably on the thermometer, it's a nice balmy 80 degrees in here. And today is a great day because we are finally going to be starting our tomato seeds. Today is March 15th. We're pretty much a month before our last frost date right now. And I feel like this is the time of year where it really starts to dawn on me that we are going to be in full-on garden season very soon. We already have a lot of seeds going, as I've shown you in the last few videos, but I feel like now is when it finally starts to feel real because very soon we're going to be transplanting some of those first seedlings out into the garden. We're getting our last few batches of seed starting done here, and tomato seeding day is always a great day. Let me go over all the varieties that I'm going to be starting today. First, I'll go over some of the smaller varieties of tomatoes, starting with the Sun Gold. This is an orange cherry tomato. We have been growing this for quite a few years now. It's a great producer and also really nice and sweet. These are a really good snacking tomato. They're almost too sweet for preserving though, I find, when I dehydrate them or cook with them. I think that because they're so sweet to start off with, their sugars are just like so intensified by cooking or drying out the moisture that I like to stick to eating the Sun Gold tomatoes fresh. But for fresh eating, you kind of can't beat the flavor. They're kind of just like eating candy. Next, I have a tomato that I discovered last year that I really enjoyed, and this was the Pink Bumblebee. This one is a slightly larger tomato. It's not quite cherry tomato size, but also not quite plum tomato size. They're kind of in between, and I actually really like the size. It makes it easier to slice if I want to cut them in half or quarters for something like salad. They're also really beautiful because they kind of have that beautiful like pink orangey striping. So they're just absolutely gorgeous, like in a mix of tomatoes. And I also really like the flavor. There's something like kind of delicate and floral about it. Very different from the Sun Gold. They're not quite like super candy sweet, but sometimes I prefer that. Sometimes I don't want like a super sweet tomato. And this is one that kind of just makes you sit there and think and like enjoy the flavors a little bit. Next, I have an Artisan Blush Tomato. I didn't grow this one last year, but I grew it 2 years ago. And I think honestly at the time I wasn't super impressed with it, but when I don't do well with something one year, I always like to give it at least a second chance. So this is going to be the second chance for this tomato. I think at the time I didn't like it because maybe it didn't produce very well and maybe the flavor was underwhelming, but I'm willing to give it a second chance. These are also another really beautiful tomato. They're kind of grape tomato shaped, so a little more oblong than a cherry tomato. And these ones are more yellow with kind of like a pink striping, if I remember correctly. So they're also very beautiful. The next one I have doesn't really have a name because this is a tomato that volunteered in our garden last year and I just saved the seeds for it. It's not an actual variety, but it was a red pear-shaped tomato, and it seems like this tomato cross-pollinated on its own from tomatoes that we had grown before. So I'm thinking that this was a cross-pollination between a yellow pear tomato and a red cherry tomato, and I really liked this Frankenstein variety that came about. It's not really a Frankenstein variety, it's just like a natural hybrid pretty much, but it was really delicious, and I found that really surprising because when I grew yellow pear tomatoes, I actually did not care for them at all. The flavor was very lackluster and I just did not enjoy them. But when these yellow pear tomatoes crossed with a yellow cherry tomato, all of a sudden they were amazing, and I just think it was really fun that they had that really fun pear shape but still tasted really good. So I'm gonna try and grow these again. I'm not sure if the seeds are going to grow true to the variety that we got last year, but I'm willing to give it a shot, and I'm just gonna grow like one plant of these just as an experiment to see what happens. Next, I have a couple of plum and paste type tomatoes. First, I have a very dependable standard Roma tomato. These ones did great for me last year and they are great for preserving. They're not very watery, so they're really good for making sauce and preserving. And then I also have another paste or plum type tomato called Plum Regal. This one is a hybrid variety, and I also grew this one last year. I don't think there was anything really like stand out about it, but like I said, I am willing to give everything a second chance. So I'm gonna try it again this year and see how it goes. If I'm not blown away by it, then I might just stick to Heirloom Roma tomatoes because that one seemed to do pretty well for me. But what I did like about this hybrid tomato was it didn't give in as quickly to disease as the Roma tomatoes did. I still think that the Roma tomatoes had a higher yield, but these Plum Regal tomatoes did last longer into the season. season than the Roma tomatoes, and those Roma tomato plants did get pretty diseased and I had to pull them out sooner. So I'm gonna grow them both. It's always nice to kind of hedge your bets and grow two varieties of the same type of tomato in case one of them gets knocked out by disease. Maybe the other one will be more resistant. Next, I'm gonna go into the larger heirloom type tomatoes. These are tomatoes that I am growing purely for flavor, not necessarily for production. I have a few varieties that I've grown before and a couple of new ones too. So first off, I have the Paul Robeson tomato. I think this is one of like the best flavored heirloom tomatoes out there. It has like a really deep, rich flavor to it. The tomatoes are also really pretty. They're kind of a mix between like a green orangey tomato. I'd say they're kind of like a medium size. They don't get too large when I grow them, but the flavor's really good. And I wouldn't say that these are super productive, but for the flavor, they're worth growing. Next, I have a purple Russian tomato. This is kind of like a plum-shaped tomato actually, and it is a little purpley. I wouldn't say it's like super purple. It's more of like a green purple. I really like the flavor of these ones. They do tend to crack a lot when I grow them, but again, because of the flavor, I'm willing to overlook some negative qualities like that. And this one, I've just really enjoyed the flavor a lot, so I grow it even though like every single tomato cracks whether or not we've had rain. Next, I have a couple of new varieties, and these are seeds that I didn't pick out but our neighbor gave them to us, so I'm just gonna try out maybe like 1 or 2 plants of each. First, I have a brandywine tomato. I don't think I've grown this like pinky red brandywine before. I think I've grown a purple one before. So yeah, brandywine tomatoes I think are pretty common in the heirloom tomato world, but I haven't grown this pink one before, so I'm gonna try that out. And then I also had these Arkansas Traveler tomatoes. They look like actually like a really good canning tomato. They don't have all of those like ridges and like funny shapes that a lot of heirloom tomatoes have, so we'll see how those do. And lastly, I have a couple of tomatoes that I'm growing pretty much just for production. I really like to use these ones for canning. First off, I have the BHN 1021 tomato. I talk about this tomato all the time. I don't know what else there is to say about it. I just really love this one. I don't know what it is about it, but it has really won over my heart. It is really productive. The plants stand up to disease really well. And I also like how the tomatoes are like very uniform. A lot of them are like the same size and shape. They're very smooth. I feel like if there was a tomato that you were like starting a farm with and wanted to sell a lot of tomatoes, this is the tomato that I would grow. They just are like the perfect tomatoes. Like when you think of a tomato, this is the tomato that comes to mind. So yeah, definitely one of my favorites. And then the other one I'm going to be growing is the Celebrity tomato. I grew it for the first time last year, and in looks and taste, I would say it's very similar to the BHN 1021. They did perform similarly, and I think I just have to grow them side by side again this year to kind of compare them very directly, because I only grew both of them together for the first time last year. So I'm gonna do that again this year, grow a couple of plants of each, and see if I really prefer one over the other. So those are all the tomato varieties. I have 12 different ones, and let me tell you, it was hard for me to narrow it down to just 12. I probably have like a dozen other tomato varieties in my collection, but I do try to keep it manageable while also having fun with it. In addition to tomatoes, I am also going to be growing a couple of other vegetables today. First off, I have some tomatillos, and I'm only going to be growing one variety this year, and I'm going to be trying a new one that I just picked up. This is the Dr. Weitsch's yellow tomatillo. We use tomatillos for making salsa verde, and I also just like to eat tomatillos fresh, kind of like a tomato. I got these yellow ones because they're supposed to be a little sweeter and less acidic than the green varieties, so hopefully it'll be better for fresh eating because I do really like them like that. And then I also have some ground cherries, and ground cherries are super productive. I didn't grow them last year because I was hoping that I would have some volunteer plants come up from the year before, and we did have some, but they didn't produce very well. So I'm gonna make sure I make an effort to start these this year. Ground cherries are a really cool fruit. They look like really tiny tomatillos, so they have that husk, and then inside there is a fruit, and these ones are yellow inside, and the flavor is really interesting. It is kind of like a citrusy pineapple flavor. It tastes very tropical, and I just think it's really cool because there are not a lot of things that you can grow from seed that you use pretty much like as a fruit. A lot of fruit I feel are like perennials, and this is one thing that you can grow from seed and get fruit from it that first year. Like I guess tomatoes are technically a fruit, but I don't really consider that a fruit. I consider it a vegetable. I'm not trying to open a huge debate up over here, but ground cherries I feel like are like a very classic fruit that you would enjoy just like snacking on. I've also made jam out of it, and I think I might just do one plant of those. The first year I grew them, I think I grew 2 plants, and we were like overloaded with ground cherries. It was insane how much just like a couple of plants could produce, and that's why I had to make jam with it that first year. And then lastly, I also have a few basils that I brought out. I always like to start my basil when I start my tomatoes. I think there's something kind of poetic about it because a lot of times you eat these two things together, but the timing also works out really well. So first off, I have the classic Genovese Italian sweet basil. You can use this in pasta, pesto, make some caprese salads with it, margarita pizzas. I mean, there's just so many things for sweet Italian basil. It's an absolute must in the garden. And I also have two other basils that might not be as common for a lot of people, but they are necessary in my garden. The first one is Thai basil. Thai basil has kind of like a licoricey flavor, but if you're not a fan of licorice, don't let that turn you off, because I also am not really a fan of licorice, but I love Thai basil. It just has like a little bit of a spiciness. It's very herbal, and it's really great obviously for Thai dishes. I also really like to throw it in stir fries. And this is a great one to grow at home because it's very difficult to find in the stores. Unless you go to like a very specialized Asian supermarket, you're not really gonna find Thai basil at a supermarket. So it's a great one to grow at home since you can't buy it at the grocery store. Next, I have Thai holy basil, also known as Tulsi. And this one we grow for tea. It's a very medicinal plant. It has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. I think as a tea, it has a very like minty kind of flavor. To me, it's almost like mentholy. It kind of like numbs your mouth a little bit. I'm not like the hugest fan of it as a tea, but Aaron really does enjoy it, and he's gone through a lot of it this winter. So I will be starting quite a few plants to make sure we have enough tea for him this coming year. So those are all the varieties that I'm going to be starting today. And when I'm planning out my seeds, specifically for tomato plants, I like to make sure that I do my research and look to see if the tomatoes I'm growing are determinate tomatoes or indeterminate tomatoes, because depending on the category, this is going to affect what kind of support you need for them as you put them out into the garden. So I always like to kind of have that in the back of my mind so that I can think about what beds they're going to go in, if they need any trellising or support. So when I do my little planning, I make my list of which ones are determinate and which ones are indeterminate, and I try and make sure that I'm going to have the proper space for the type of tomato that it is. Generally speaking, determinate tomatoes stay a smaller size. They can grow more like a bush with less pruning, and indeterminate tomatoes, they grow very tall and you will want some trellising for them or some support, and a lot of times those ones do really well with more vigorous pruning. Determinate tomatoes also tend to put off a lot of their fruit all at once. So if you're looking to can or preserve or make tomato sauce, anything like that, determinate tomatoes might be what you want to grow. But if you're looking for tomatoes that will produce tomatoes over the entire season, then you might want to look into indeterminate tomatoes. So yeah, that's definitely important information to have, and you'll just have to look up, depending on whatever varieties you have, what category they belong to. So that's enough talking. Let's get into the planting. I'm gonna write my plant tags and then start filling my pots with soil. I just bought this massive box of plant tags that has 1,000 plant tags in it because I just go through so many plant tags throughout the season, because I've learned that I need to label every individual pot, because if not, it's going to get mixed up either when I'm like shifting things around during the growing season or when they actually get planted. So I make sure I do a tag for every single pot, and if you're looking for a marker that will not fade in the sun, this garden marker is great. It will last longer than a Sharpie. The problem I found is then it's kind of impossible to take off after, but at least you know it won't fade in the sun. I'll link both of these things down below in the description box. They are like the must-have tools for seed starting. And today I'm going to be using more of my Bootstrap Farmer 2-inch pots. And the way I've set this up is I actually only have one pot per variety, regardless of how many plants of each variety I'm going to grow. And what I'm going to do is in each of these pots, I'm going to plant however many seeds I need to grow the number of plants I want. So for most of these varieties, I actually only need like 1 or 2 because I don't want to be growing like 10 of everything. But for example, my Roma tomatoes, these are the ones that I'm going to grow the most because I want to can a lot of these tomatoes, and I'm going to have, in the end, I'm aiming for 8 plants. But instead of having 8 different pots, what I'm going to do is probably put like 10 to 12 seeds in this one pot, and then later on I'm gonna go separate them and eventually have 8 plants in their own pot. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because I simply don't have the space to give every individual plant its own pot at this time. I'm gonna show you later what my seed starting shelf looks like, but things are getting to max capacity there, and I really need to be mindful of how much space I really need to be using. Tomato plants are really easy to separate later on, and same thing with basil. With basil, you might have to be a little more gentle, but it definitely can be done. I've done it in the past. So I'm saving a lot of space by condensing 2, 4, or even 8 plants in one pot at this point, instead of giving each of those plants its own pot, because all of these plants are going to fit in half a tray versus like 1 or 1.5 trays if I had immediately from the start done like 1 or 2 seeds per pot. At this time of the year, when I am in the middle of seed starting season, but it's still too cold for me to have anything actually outside hardening off, I have to be really mindful of the capacity of my space, because I don't have unlimited seed starting space. I also don't have unlimited grow lights. I only have 3 shelves with grow lights, so I need to make sure that whatever I'm starting can fit on those shelves. And again, I'm going to show you that at the end of this video after I'm done with all the seeding, just so you can see what it looks like right now. And these seeds will do fine for the first couple of weeks, being a little bit crowded. As long as they get separated out later on before they get too large, it shouldn't be an issue. I am using seed starting mix to fill my pots today. It's really nice and loose and fluffy, so it's going to be a little bit easier for me to separate my seedlings later on. And since I'm going to be potting them up pretty quickly into potting mix, I'm not worried that there are no nutrients in the seed starting mix. And this is actually another benefit of growing multiple plants per pot and thinning them out later on if you are planning on using seed starting mix to start your seeds, because seed starting mix is more expensive than potting mix. If you can kind of condense the number of plants using your seed starting mix in the beginning and then later on pot them up into the less expensive potting mix, then that's going to save you money as well. So here are my pots all filled in, and I am just going to go ahead and add my seeds in. And for the basil, I will probably want quite a few of each plant, so I'm just going to sprinkle over a good number of seeds, and I'll decide later on how many of each variety I actually want, but I have a lot of seeds of these, so I might as well seed them in thickly, and later on I can just pick the strongest plants. These sweet basil seeds are actually seeds I saved from last year, and I just pulled off the flowers off the plants and I haven't separated out the seeds. So I'm just gonna kind of like crush each of these flowers over my pot to release the seeds. And any of that like extra dried flower plant matter that gets in, I'm not worried about that. And it actually smells so good right now. Crushing these dried flowers, it smells like I have fresh basil in here with me right now. It's pretty incredible. And next, these are my ground cherry seeds. They are so tiny. And just gonna do 3 of those. And all of these seeds are really small, so I think I'm just gonna like press them in. Maybe give them like a really light dusting of soil on top, but I'm gonna try not to cover them up too much. So for my tomatoes, like I showed you earlier, here's my list. I like to write out how many of each variety I am planning on having in the end. And what I'm gonna do is take each of these numbers and maybe add a couple of extra seeds into each of these pots, just to make sure that in case some of them don't germinate, I still have a good number. So for the plum regal, I am going to want 2 plants of those, and I'm just gonna do 4 seeds and pick the 2 strongest ones later on. For Roma tomatoes, since I actually want 8 of those, this is going to be my most crowded pot, and I think I'll do maybe around like 12 seeds of those. So that's what they look like. They're pretty close together. I tried to like kind of spread them out. Since I have the space for it, it'll make it a little easier to separate, but if you need to start more seeds, you can definitely crowd them even more than that. This just so happens to be the one variety that I'm going to be growing the most of, so this is as crowded as it's going to get for my plants. But the same process really works for whatever number of seeds you want to start. So I'm just going to lightly cover those with soil. That's it, that's the whole process. So I'm going to continue and finish off the rest of these seeds. So here we are, all done and planted. These seeds are going to go inside to germinate and grow for the next few weeks. And I also just want to show you my leeks and onions, which I am bringing out every day into the greenhouse. And honestly, it's just because I don't have enough space inside for them anymore. So they are living out here during the day, but still coming in at night because we have a few nights forecasted in like the mid-20s. So I don't want them to freeze too much. But they did just get a nice fresh haircut this morning, so they're all nicely trimmed, and you can actually start to see some really nice growth on those plants. Like, look at that little guy over there. You can see the beginnings of an onion. So that's looking really good. There's another one here. You can see how the stem is starting to look really nice, and they're getting really thick for these plants. I honestly would have liked to have these transplanted already, but we just have been having some pretty cold weather lately. If it was just like in the 30s, I wouldn't worry about it and I would probably put them out. But since we are having some temps in the 20s, I am going to keep them inside for a few nights longer. So hopefully it'll be a couple more weeks and then these can go out permanently. So here's a look at the seed starting situation right now. I have rearranged a little bit. This is a tray with the tomatoes that I just started, but since most of the tray was empty, I just consolidated it with some other random seedlings that I had. So these are the eggplant seeds that I started on this side over here, and then over here these are the herbs that I started, the summer savory and the marjoram. And I do kind of have to do this like halfway sticking out situation over here for now. And on the other side, I have my peppers, which have only just now started to germinate. So you can see I've got a couple that are fully up. These ones have been up for a few days now. Some of them are just starting to peek out, but then I have other ones that have not germinated yet. So they are really taking quite a while. I think it's been over 2 weeks now. And I think it's just because we have been keeping our house a couple of degrees cooler than we did in previous years. We used to keep our house at like 71 degrees, and this year we're down to like 68 degrees because, you know, trying to save money and energy, whatever, all that. And I think those 2 degrees really do make a difference for peppers because they like heat to germinate. So if you do keep your house colder than 68 degrees Fahrenheit, I would highly recommend getting a heat mat for your pepper seedlings because that will help speed up your germination. I'll find one and link it down below. But yeah, those have really just been taking their sweet time, but I am happy to see that some of them are starting to come up. By the way, whenever you are starting seeds and you have them indoors, you will inevitably have fungus gnats. So I always have one of these yellow sticky traps, and I know it's kind of gross, but it catches all the fungus gnats that come out, and it really is like a must if you're starting seeds indoors. Even if it's just for a short amount of time, they just like appear out of thin air. That's like the proper science for it, I'm sure. And without these yellow sticky traps, it is like such a nuisance. So I'll link those down below as well. If you don't have them, you definitely should get them. They help a lot. Here is the tray that I seeded very recently with bok choy, kale, spinach, lettuce, lots of different greens, and those have pretty much all come up now. I'm actually going to turn these lights off right now so it's a little easier to see, but here you can see all those little seedlings, and these ones I think I only seeded less than a week ago and they're like all up, versus the peppers that were seeded over 2 weeks ago and are only just starting to come up. But it's just because of the type of seeds they are. These ones are much faster to germinate. You can see the beets on the end here, how fun. You can obviously tell that these on the corner are the golden beets, and these are the red beets. You can already see the stems have their distinct colors, and the lettuce is already starting to look pretty distinct as well. Like this one's a little bit more frilly, and this one has like slight red coloring on the edges. And I'm only waiting for one other variety to come up, another kind of lettuce, but everything else has come up really nicely. On the top shelf here, I have my Brassicas, which are looking really nice. They are actually a really good size now. Got a few sets of true leaves on all of these. And most days I actually do bring these out to the greenhouse so that they can spend the day soaking in the sun. I didn't happen to do it today, but most days they are out there and then coming back in at night, just like the onions. My little thyme seedlings are looking so good. I actually pinched these back when they were pretty young so that they would branch out a little better, and I'm just so happy with how they're looking. That's such a nice little thyme start there. And yeah, it's just getting really big really quickly. My lemongrass, I did end up potting it up because it was just in too small of a pot. The roots were getting very crowded and the leaves were starting to yellow. It is looking a tiny bit ragged because one of our cats was chewing on it. Otherwise, it would look a little bit nicer, but overall still looking pretty good. So there's a little look and an update on our little seed starting shelf. Everything seems to be doing pretty well so far, and I hope that if you're starting seeds this year, your seedlings are also doing really well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what varieties of tomatoes you're growing this year that you're excited for. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.